What's going on, workforce? Brian here.
Chris here.
And today we're tackling a very complex subject, and it's the Final Fantasy XIV-2, what we want to see. Now, Chris, you don't think this is happening, or you and I have debated this for a long time, so I want you to kind of speak first and also represent the person who's saying 14.2 will never happen, or that kind of perspective, and then we're going to kind of dive into theory and speculation and
Yeah.
fun land.
So
where
I
I
think
live.
I think when we talk about it never happening, I think the most important thing when you join into an MMO or a live service game or anything like that is that you feel that it's worth continuing to play or it's worth getting into in the first place. And so I think the amount of time that a player has to look out is a lot shorter than the amount of time that a dev has to look out. And so in my mind, a fair balanced approach on like, will you get joy out of it and will you feel like everything you unlock for your character has staying power, is will it stick around the rest of this expansion and one more expansion? So you're always looking at the remainder of the current expansion and 2 years, which means the furthest you should ever be really worried about. If you want to shoot the breeze or whatever, that's fine. But the furthest you should ever be looking out is 4 years for a game. Anything beyond that, you're going to get your value 10 times over. What does it matter if it ends 4 years from now? So I don't believe that 6.0 will be the end of 14. I'm not saying I couldn't be wrong, but I think there will be a 7.0. And so that's why I don't think that we'll see a 14.2. But this conversation does bring up, as we start to see things like PSO2 Genesis and things like that, it starts to bring up some interesting conversations of like, what would we want to be drastically different? I think we've had this conversation before, but in the wake of 5.3, and in the wake of seeing what new titles are bringing to the table and new consoles are bringing to the table, it's interesting to think about like, okay, if we just put that to the side for a second, what does happen when 14 ends?
And so my definition of 14.2, it could be 17, it could be whatever the 2016 yoshi-p project is.
Sure.
But I've been referring to it as 14.2 because it is very, 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 very difficult to move a community from one game to the next. People still play 11. I advocate for 11 coming back to consoles. I still play 11. I think that ultimately, I think we'll see a Square Enix subscription. It just seems like that's where the market's going. Could be easily wrong on that in that regards. 14.2 represents a narrative focus. I think when I look at the story, and not talking spoilers here, but when we look at the story, everything is building up to something big. And I've been feeling this, especially since Stormblood. A lot of my critique of the game is like, it feels like back in 2016, something changed and the game has gotten better and it's improved, but it hasn't been what we saw prior to that. Like, we saw a massive amount of investment into the game. Now we're seeing what I would describe as a little bit less, as staff has been upgraded and they've moved on to this 2016 project. So what does that mean? The story and the lore of 14, in my mind, especially after 5.3 pretty much confirmed it for me, is going to have that cut over. We are going to either see a rejoining or something, but I don't think 14 has to end. I think when we think of it as like, hey, by the way, you just finished, the Fellowship of the Ring. Now we're into the second, now we're into the Two Towers. It's all one giant story, but offering a way to say, hey, it's been what's 1,000 years after the rejoining, or what's 10,000 years after the rejoining? What does this world look like? How are we going to be a part of that narrative, so to speak, to where, as a longtime player of this game, respecting the past and the players who've been here, allowing me to play in the space. Because my biggest concern, I think one of the things I do want to define really quickly, because we see 3 games kind of doing it differently. 14 did it with 1.0 to 2.0, where that world's gone. That's a part of the narrative lore history. If you were there and you experienced it. You cannot experience that anymore. Destiny 2 is another example. It's got all these ships coming in. They're blowing up zones. They're like, if you don't experience it now, you won't experience it until much later. They're putting it in what's called the vault, and things are going to come in and out of the vault. Okay, so when is that going to happen? We don't know. And then you have PSO2, New Genesis, in which that you can actively jump between the two with one. It's the same game. Literally, you're not downloading a new client. You literally, play the game and you decide whether you want to go into the New Genesis world or you want to go play in the current game space. So those are 3 really interesting examples of how it could be, how people...
And there's hybrids. There's plenty of games that have kind of
Wow.
mixed those approaches. WoW has mixed. WoW's a little piece of a couple of those approaches.
Right. So, I mean, whether it happens or not, so like like you often say to me, in the term of indefinite time, yes, like the sun will end, right?
It's not a hard prediction, right?
Right. But I think essentially when I look at it, I honestly get a feeling for 3 years. I think 6.0, we're going to see this big like culmination of everything we've been going on. And then 14 will continue to exist. And I honestly think we'll continue to get content and we'll continue to get patches, because why essentially sit here and say, all right, we're done. However, I think if there is that connective, kind of tissue like we see with New Genesis, that will ultimately like you can go definitely experience Heavensward. You can experience all of this great story on your own time if you want to, but also here's the next chapter. Here's the next saga that's taking place. And it happens to, be in a new engine, and it happens to be upgraded for modern consoles and, things that people often want. Like when yoshi-p talks about the amount of work it would take to remove PS3 assets from 14. Well, he's probably like, we ain't going to do it, but we've already done it. Like, it's like, okay, here's that chapter. Here's this new starting point. Here's, 7-8 years of investment into the next thing, but it happens to be what we call 14.2. So that's our definition.
Yeah. And does that mean 14 is over? I haven't seen the thumbnail for this video yet, but like, does that mean like 14 has gone into a living time capsule state like 11? Like, I don't know that they would shut the servers off. I don't think that makes sense.
They still support 11. They still support it.
So, but what does that look like? Does that continue to get new dungeons? Does that continue to get new voice acting and things like that? What is it like as a player? Because obviously the content schedule will scale down, and we've already felt certain aspects of the content scale down in order to get new content instead, right? They put their effort over here, so we see this side drop off. This would be the whole thing starting to dial back as the population kind of dropped off. And what is that in trade for, right? So in 14, it's in trade for, okay, they did less dungeons, but then we get these crazy relic things, whether or not you're a fan of Eureka or the new Eureka. That is where the effort is going, right? We're getting more voice acting than ever before. We're getting beast tribes. We're getting incredible new zones. We're getting a crossover raid, which is just a huge amount of risk and effort, and I'm sure a ton of testing. And it's been enjoyable fights. And so like, that's what we've gotten with their time. Where would we want that to go in the new stuff to be worth feeling like we're not like, man, I wish they just, because that's how I felt when we walked into Destiny 2. I felt like I wish we just stayed in Destiny 1. And in many ways I still feel that way.
I think that's definitely a sentiment within the Destiny community. Like, yep. And it feels like that
where we'd be by now.
Imagine where we'd be.
To bolt things onto Destiny 1. Now that I'm not a dev and didn't have to deal with whatever there's got to be somebody that's just like, oh my God, thank God we're not still trying to just strap things on to this like duct taped amalgamation.
So let me answer your question, because like there's multiple categories. I think if I was going to answer this from a narrative perspective, I think that whatever comes with 14.2 respects the history of our character, like they did from 1.0 to 2.0, meaning let's say it's we're just speculating and ballparking for fun here, everybody, but let's say it's like 1,000 years in the future. Like, it's like kind of our soul. We've got like memories of the past and things, like ways in which that it's like, thank you very much, like we know that you've been with this game. I think from a financial perspective, it's still the same sub, meaning you play 14, whether you're 14 or 14.2, like you're just playing the game. You log in. I think from a communication and community perspective, whether you're playing in the new engine or the old engine, your free company exists, your player experience exists. If I was playing like doing a Rathalos farm and Chris was like, hey, I'm gonna go play, hey Chris, we're doing Rathalos, why don't you just pop on in here and join us? As easy as it is to world visit. Like, when I look at the world visit system and the technology there, like it's like, if that's the dream, it's not any disconnected from what it is today. You can literally, it's like you go to the Aetheryte and you pick your daggum chapter, okay, cool. Here I am. Okay, boom. Here I am. Now we're having fun and we're doing these different things. I think that's the technological piece of it. I think, and I would say there's definitely people that I can agree with. Like, let's make this thing just look mind blowing. And it already is. 14 is a beautiful game. But I'm speaking not as somebody who enjoys the look of it. I'm speaking of, it doesn't exist in a bubble. I've been playing New World. New World is breathtaking. It's breathtaking. Blue Protocol. breathtaking. It's just like, oh wow, they're setting those games up obviously as 10-year games. Those are gonna, like in 10 years from now,
and they'll look old 10 years from now.
Yeah, exactly. Like, in 10 years when everything's like 16K
2D screens.
What pedestrians over here to 2D. So it's like, I don't want to sit here. Like, for me, I love the art direction and the style for it. I look at some of the things and features we really just can't seem to get right. Like with Ronso, I can't wear a cowboy hat. Like, as silly as it is, I have finally become the guy who, I wouldn't ask this as a part of an open Q&A because I would hate myself for it. But it's like, oh my gosh, can I wear this cowboy hat on my Ronso? No. So like looking at it from a core perspective, race, here's the job system, here's some of the battle system changes. And for me personally, battle system wise, sub-job system, I think that's for the Final Fantasy universe is the most well-defined and flexible system. And yes, there's going to always be a meta. I don't care. I think the sub-job system is something fun that adds a little bit unique flavor to that of the character. So I could see the 14.2 being able to kind of reintroduce the battle system from the start without having to sit here and worry about breaking dungeons and breaking raids, later on in the game. Chris?
I would love the sub-job system to be more of a way to hybrid your gameplay when you're doing solo stuff.
Yeah.
I hate the divide between hopping onto my low HP gatherer, which we're going to solve by making me perma-stealth, and being a warrior. Like, why can I not be a warrior with an axe doing my, why can those not start to play off each other? Even if in a dungeon, for the sake of simplicity, I'm just a warrior. Right out in the world, it's like, oh well, I'm gonna go do these fates, so I'm a warrior white mage. Cool, yeah, that's awesome. But within raids, like, you can't be a tank and a healer because we need people to feel like they're the healers and people to feel like they're the tanks. That's fine. Like, whatever makes sense, whatever makes it fun. But like when I'm in, I feel the same way about like cheats in a game. As far as balance goes, if you want to cheat in solo games, especially that don't have any form of leaderboard or anything like that,
yeah,
I don't care. I don't care. But when you start involving someone else's play, someone else has worked really hard to get to the top of the leaderboard, or someone else is literally playing with you, either through a matchmaking system or, through a friend, and they don't want you to cheat and then you do it, that's when I start to have an issue with it, when it kind of breaks that social contract. So if you have a class that's just broken for outworld farming because the subclass system isn't perfect, that's fine.
Yeah.
If you want to have it for unsynced dungeons, oh my god, unsynced Samurai Red Mage is outrageous. Fine, go nuts. Like, set a record time. That's kind of my thought on that.
Yeah.
As far as like where we jump in time, lore wise, I want to go back.
Oh really? Okay.
I want to go back. I want to go sit. Are we talking spoilers in here?
Well, as we can, as long as we now say, if you're here with us, everybody, let's talk some spoilers.
Okay, so I want to just kind of
15 minutes into
where
the
I want to
videos.
be. I'm not necessarily talking about current lore, but I am like assuming that we've all been here and that this has ended. So I want to go back and sit on the 14 and see the world create, and I want that to be a journey through that and end where our current lore picks up, right? So it ends in them being like, we've got to deal with this Zodiark Hydaelyn mess, and then that's the end of that 10-year or 7-year arc. So we're always building, and we'll know, but like, I have so many questions in how we got there and like why that seemed like a good idea and what all the decisions, and you could, like, just because we know how it ends doesn't mean that wouldn't be an interesting 7 years and like, oh, that was a great idea, or this thing I agree with actually was so stupid. And so like, I would love to kind of play through that and see, especially because we know that Ascians, like, it's a job title, it's not their name, so it'd be interesting to know, like, were there multiple Elidibus's?
Yeah.
Were there multiple Emmett Selks, right? Who held that job?
Prior to the Sundering, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to go back pre-sundering. So if we're going to rejoin, let's rejoin, shoot back in time. Let's be unsundered souls.
Oh, I like that. Okay, so outside of the narrative, I think the other big system change that I would love to see 14.2 bring back, and this is something from 14.1 and 1.0 and 11, would be a player-driven economy. From the battle system in itself, we talk about sub-jobs. One of the things that, and this is just from my perspective with New World, The fact that New World lets you kind of carry and fast swap between up to 3 weapons at level 30, it allows then the ability to have ammunition. And the ammunition plays a role. So if you're doing bows or guns or things like that, well, you're not left out. Like in 14.1.0, you had ammunition, but if you ran out of arrows, you screwed, because it's like you can't do anything. You can't.
That's how WoW was at the same time.
Yeah, it's like you suck.
Hunters had arrows.
Yeah, and I would actually, I like ammunition as a part of the world, but you have to be able to fast change your weapon. You have to be able to sit here and say, oh, out of arrows, now I have either another ranged weapon or I've got melee. So you're not completely like, well, guys, I gotta go home. You know.
Is ammunition expensive?
No.
And not to get totally derailed here, but like raid ammunition was expensive in WoW. So you carried, like back in the day, you carried raid ammunition, like just general, I'm killing mobs in the world, because like they're literally not dropping loot that justifies the
cost of that. Yeah. We'll have to wait and see, like, as that evolves, but I like that. I made a ton of money back in 14.1.0 making arrows. Like there was always a demand.
Food was important back in early WoW too. I don't know if it was in like consumables, because the world was dangerous.
Yeah,
the consumables mattered.
Yeah, so yeah, consumables matter. I think that's something I want to see that shift back into more that player driven economy. Because I think and people have argued against my perspective. They're like, oh, it is a player driven economy. It is for housing, which needs to be completely fixed and redone. Like 14.2 needs to redo housing at its core, knowing what we know. It was originally designed for free companies. It's opened up to everybody, and it's literally the most frustrating thing to see continually not fixed. And it's because it requires so much effort on the devs. Like I think essentially when you look,
so few people.
Yeah. Well, it's still one of the biggest things. People have to bot to get it. Anyway, I'm just saying, like
if
housing,
you totally fixed it, you would still only fix it for the number of plots that there are.
Right. I would love to see them redesign how that functions at its core. And then, so the player-driven economy in 14 is glamour focused, it's housing focused, and at random intervals of content, it's progression focused.
Catch-up gear.
It's catch-up gear, yeah. So I hear the children. So, Chris, is there any thoughts that you wanted to have? Because I listed off a bunch of different systems, and I'm going to go check in on Mikey. 1 second.
Yeah, I think that, Brian and I have talked about this at length before, and I think the big thing is, what does it look like when it relates to the current system? My concern is what do we do with current jobs that don't make sense anymore? If in the current meta, it doesn't make sense to have, if it doesn't make sense to have like a Dragoon, how do you deal with that, right? So if you can go back and forth between these games, are there jobs that don't make the jump, right? If you decide Black Mage is going to split into these two different casters, what happens to the existing Black Mage? I think
everything's preserved. So just that everything would be preserved for existing.
So are there classes that carry over where their level is symbiotic, or it's two totally different leveling systems? If you have a level 60 warrior in old .0, that has no bearing on the experience of your warrior in new .0.
I think that it would be beneficial if there was some form of like thank you experience, not progression experience. Meaning that, hey, yeah, by the way, you leveled up here. There's a package waiting for you.
I love a system that just thank you experience, just things that let you put points into.
Yeah.
You can put 10 points into mount speed within Kalusia.
Yeah. Well, especially when you have that narrative shift.
After we're done going to Kalusia, what does that matter?
Right, but like when I would think thank you experience would be a really fun little system for kind of transitioning between the two. But no, the reason is, and the logical reason is that when I look at the game itself, when we talked to Skill Up, he was streaming it, and even with the adjustments, people who really love the changes to ARR and all that, like those are already mostly players. New players are having a better experience with it, but it's not like a cure. Like if you would ever define it, ARR still presents a challenge. It also presents AR, Heaven's Words, Shadowbringers, Stormblood, 6.0, like all of that. Because again, I'm still thinking 3 to 4 years for 14.2. Like, okay, wait a minute. Like you're talking 600-700 hours that I need to invest, and I have to watch the story, and I've got to do all of this. Even if you shorten that down to 500 or 600 hours, like that's still quite a chunk of time to get in, and then like at some point you got to have a new starting point so that new players can come in, and having those connective tissues I think will end up allowing players to go back and experience that story and that appreciation for the world without having to lose access to it like we are in Destiny, like we have in 1.0, 2.0. And so I think that's essentially how I just see it from a game design perspective. And so at some point it had, in the far reaches of infinity, they could go out to 12.0. Sure. And I don't think they're going to turn off the servers. I think essentially, that thank you experience concept would be huge. You got thank you experience because you leveled up warrior in 14.
They can do it a lot of different ways, right? Diablo did the Paragon system. I mean, there's 1,000 different examples of how you can have experience that either slightly alters gameplay or honestly is purely cosmetic or is purely personal, right? Cheaper teleports doesn't affect other players. Honestly, teleports don't break most of us anyway. It's just like a nice little thing. More free points, right? So maybe you just eventually unlock enough free points that you teleport everywhere for free anyway. And it's like what each one gets progressively more expensive. There's all sorts of little things. Having your retainer have one extra slot on the market board isn't going to drastically break everything. Okay. So there's a lot of things they could do. I would love to see the auction house reworked in its entirety. So if you're going to move to a player-driven economy, the auction house is something that's a major limiter of that. But I don't know. I would love to know what other people think. Like, if you could change stuff, what would you want? If you could put anything in, you're rebuilding the game from scratch so that there's not an idea too big. What would you want changed and what would you want preserved? What would you want to feel like as you jumped back and forth between these games? If we assume that that's the reality that Brian and I both want to happen. If you're jumping back and forth, what do you want to feel familiar as you go back and forth?
So let us know in the comments below. We really look forward to having that conversation with you. But yeah, that's this video. Thanks, Chris, for we were able to sit down and we're gonna be hopefully bringing out some more of these videos for you here over the course of the next couple of weeks. We're just trying to find the right time that works for the family and works for our job. So guys, we love you. Thanks for watching. And that's it. Chris, you got anything else before we wrap up?
No, that's it.
All right. Bye guys. We'll see you soon and take care. This video is sponsored by me, Ginger Prime. Hopefully you'll check out my podcast channel, Ginger Gaming Radio, which we have lots of guests, lots of great conversations, and even more highlights. Links are in the description below. Let me know what you think. Thanks.